All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who have experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson, and I have a cold, so I want to just put that out there to everybody. But this is a podcast where we are talking to master trauma therapists and really game changers in the field of trauma therapy. Today, I am so excited to introduce my guest, Lisa Ferentz. Lisa, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go, and the good news is I have a cold too.
All right.
So we'll be very compassionate with each other.
Sounds good. All right. So Lisa is a LCSW. She's been in private practice for over 30 years and is a nationally recognized expert in the field of trauma. She's an adjunct faculty member at several universities and is founder of the Institute for Advanced Psychotherapy Training and Education. Now in its 8th year of providing continuing education to mental health professionals, Lisa's also the author of 2 books, Treating Self-Destructive Behaviors in Traumatized Clients, A Clinician's Guide, as well as Letting Go of the Self-Destructive Behaviors, a workbook of hope and healing. In 2009, she was voted the Social Worker of the Year by Maryland Society for Clinical Social Work. All right, Lisa, that's obviously just a little bit about you, but step back. First of all, just tell us something a little bit personally about yourself, maybe where you're calling from, and then we will dive in.
Sure. So I'm calling from very cold Baltimore, Maryland. It's about 20 degrees here today. I'm originally from New York, but I've been in Maryland now for over 30 years. So I guess I have to call this my second home. New York is always going to be my first home. I started out actually in the theater, and I was a dancer, and I did musical theater, and I've done that for most of my life. Wanted to make that a career, but then also wanted a very stable life and wanted a family and children. And if you know anything about the theater world, you know that that's a mutually exclusive proposition. And so I decided to go into social work instead. And I'm really thrilled that I was able to retain so much of my creative identity as a clinician and as a trauma specialist. So it's been a wonderful confluence of 2 of my greatest passions, which are theater and doing things that are creative and helping people to heal. So I feel very blessed that I can do that.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting to me. And I hear that coming up again and again, this the use of or the integration of, creativity. I was, my last guest talked a lot about that. And to hear you talk about that, I'm really excited to you talk more about how you integrate that or how that influences you in the work you do.
Sure.
We'll get to that. But let's start off with a quote or mantra here. This podcast really is about highlighting your journey and really kind of focusing in on what's inspired you with the goal of inspiring other clinicians. So share with us, Lisa, a quote or mantra, something that kind of has inspired you.
I love that question. The thing that comes immediately to my mind is a quote from, believe it or not, a science fiction writer named Aldous Huxley. And years ago, I saw this, I don't even remember where, but it was just on a sign somewhere. And it said, experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. And as a therapist working with trauma and trauma narratives, I really needed a way to retain a sense of hope in the work that I do. And, trauma survivors are so focused on why. Why did this horrible thing happen to me? And of course, that's such a legitimate question to ask. But those of us in the field who work with trauma know full well that you're never going to find a good enough answer to why. And so for me, the goal was to begin to move people from why to what can I do with it? And that's why that quote really spoke to me and really resonated for me, because it's not about the trauma. It's what people do with their trauma that really in so many ways defines their life journey.
So I love that quote. So it's not about what happens to you. It's about what you do with what happens to you. I mean, obviously there's so much power in that, right? It gives the client or the individual the power in a sense. And of course, having them or guiding them to own that and accept that power is maybe not so easy all the time. But when did that resonate with you? When did that become, all right, you know what? This is really something that I need to pay more attention to.
I think it kicked in for me, believe it or not, as a grad student when I began working with very traumatized folks, and a lot of the clients that I was given in my caseload were adult children of alcoholics. And I should say that I think I'm in the minority of trauma specialists in that I am not a trauma survivor. I grew up in an incredibly loving and safe and nurturing family. And so I really didn't fully understand at all what it meant to be a trauma survivor and to live with trauma. And very early on, as I said, as a grad student, I began to see the extraordinary resilience in trauma survivors. And I really began to see the difference between clients who were very mired in, why did this happen to me? I can't believe this was done to me. My life is over. The world is a horrible place. Versus clients who kind of from their own inner wisdom were able to approach their trauma from this perspective of, okay, it happened. I couldn't control it. I can't change it. Where do I go from here? Now what do I do? So I really got that inspiration from these extraordinarily resilient, brave, creative, courageous clients. And seeing that quote so early in my career, I'm so grateful that I saw it when I saw it, because it just clicked with what I was actually experiencing sitting in the room with my clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome. And I want to touch back on what you started out by saying was that, you are in the minority or think you're in the minority of trauma specialists because you haven't experienced a trauma. And I think that's a good point for our listeners to take in. I think there is this maybe common belief that individuals who go into this field have necessarily, become traumatized. And that's not always the case. It doesn't have to be. But also, just to see what you did within these different clients. There were individuals who were doing something different, and that resilience comes through. That's one of the things that really got me into this field. And we're going to talk more about that. And that's one of the things that really keeps me going is seeing how people, despite, having been traumatized and experienced these oftentimes horrific things, still have that light and that hope and that, ability to get back up. And this is a great kind of lead into our next question, which is really how you got into this field. A lot of people get into this field for a variety of different reasons. We have listeners who have been therapists and don't really think that they've been working with trauma clients before. For myself, it had a lot to do with my brother who's in the special forces coming back from Iraq with PTSD. And I was so excited to talk to him, and I just pestered him really about what'd you do? What was, and he just didn't want to talk about it. Couldn't talk about it. And I didn't know that. Yeah. And I just screwed it up, and a lot of this is a lot of what I want to do, a lot of what I'm trying to do is to come back in a sense and do it the right way. So break it down for us, Lisa. How did you get into this field?
Well, my mom always jokes that from the time I was 5 years old, I would sit on the front step of our house and all of the neighborhood kids would come and sit next to me and tell me their problems. And I was do you remember Lucy from the Peanuts comic strip? Yeah. Right? So I wasn't charging anybody, but I was sort of the Lucy of the neighborhood. And I can't really explain to you, Guy, why it was that I had this predilection towards really being interested in people's problems, but I just did. And, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And as I said, I grew up in a very safe, very loving, wonderful, wonderful family, still have an incredibly wonderful family. So I had this rock solid foundation of growing up with this real sense of self-worth and self-esteem. I was told on a daily basis that I could be anything I wanted to be and I could do anything I wanted to do. And so I had incredible secure attachments throughout my childhood. And with that, had this real interest and fascination in human behavior and just I think I was always a good listener. Maybe being the oldest of 4 kids, that's kind of a skill that you, by definition, get good at. So, although I always wanted to be a movie star and a Broadway star, and I was pretty clear up until my 20s that that's in fact what I was going to do, there was always this other passion sort of in the wings, and that was being so curious about human beings and what makes them tick. And I think when I made the decision, in my early 20s, I actually got my undergraduate degree in theater, so I was still very committed at that point to being an actress, but was a psych minor because, I didn't want to give up that love. When I made the decision to really pursue social work and the field of being a psychotherapist, part of why I wanted to do this was because I really wanted to pay it forward. I knew what it felt like to wake up every morning and feel good about yourself, and I wanted to be able to help other people achieve that same place of inner peace and confidence and the ability, because I think from inner peace and confidence and self-worth comes the capacity to make really good life choices in relationships, in your career, as a parent. So I wanted to do this because I wanted to pay it forward. Now, truthfully, I had no idea what it was going to be like to work with trauma survivors. And I always say I did not sign up to work with, multiplicity and people who cut themselves and people who are sexually abused. That really was not my intention back in my mid-20s. But for whatever the reason, I had a supervisor who kept throwing these incredibly difficult cases at me. And a lot of them were adult children of alcoholics, and a lot of them had eating disorders and histories of sexual abuse and physical abuse. And I realized pretty quickly that I was way in over my head, did not know what I was doing. And so I made this very conscious decision, and I think a lot of therapists do, and that is I'm going to shut up and listen, and I'm going to be the student, and I'm going to let the client be the teacher. I need them to teach me what it feels like to grow up with trauma, and I need them to teach me about their pain because I did not understand that pain or know that pain. What I did know was self-worth and confidence and resilience and creativity. And so I figured, okay, that's what I can bring to the table, and that's what I can help kind of tease out in these clients. But I always say I've been in private practice for over 30 years now, and I honestly believe that what I've learned and what I know, I've learned from my clients. They've been so unbelievably generous and gracious in terms of allowing me to be a student in their presence and really teaching me, what it's like to have the pain that they have. So I provide the hope. I'm sort of the cheerleader, and I provide the hope. And certainly now I can provide the psychoeducation and the tools and the resources for self-soothing and to help them resolve their trauma in ways that are safe and in ways that are appropriate. So certainly over the years, as you get more seasoned and you go to every workshop and you read every book there is to read, and you get inspired by so many of the giants in our field, now I can say I truly know what I'm doing. But there's something very great about allowing ourselves as therapists to have that sort of Buddhist open mind and just be the student and trust that the client is always the best expert in the client, not us.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of nailed it there. I mean, I just love that image of you sitting on the steps, as Lucy in the neighborhood and, just being in this environment of love and security. And, there's a difference between, being interested in people's, or being able to listen to the neighborhood kids and, being interested in their problems, and the difference between that and obviously getting involved or specializing in trauma. And you talked about being as an undergrad, your supervisor was kind of feeding you all these really intense clients, and you said, wow, I'm kind of way in over my head. Yeah. And we're going to jump to that in our next question. But I love what you said. There was a point at which you said, I need to shut up and I need to listen. Talk about that a little, Lisa.
Sure. My dear friend Dick Schwartz, who I'm sure a lot of you know and respect, has a wonderful little saying when he's sitting with clients. He often says the word wait, and wait stands for why am I talking? And I love that because I think that, sometimes, and I think this comes from a countertransferential place, sometimes therapists have this anxiety about, I can't let there be silence, or I always always have to, have a brilliant comeback, or I have to have the solution, or I have to have the right answer. And I think that one of the really humbling and important things about being sort of the art of being a good therapist, if you will, is really being comfortable with the silence and trusting that if we do shut up, that clients do have this remarkable capacity to tap into their own inner wisdom. Now, I think you have to approach this work with that belief that clients, despite the horrific experiences that they've endured, they have this inner wisdom, and that can never be extinguished, regardless of what they've been through. And so once you really believe that and can hold that in a therapy session, that no matter how much pain that client is in, there still is this remarkably wise part. And if you can allow for the silence, if you can allow for the space, and certainly I think part of our job as therapists is to create a safe holding space, and often that's done with silence. But when we can successfully do that, and we know that there's a very loving, trusting therapeutic relationship, clients do tap into their own inner wisdom. And that's where so many of their most brilliant insights and answers and life choices, come from, as opposed to the therapist telling them what to do. Right.
Yeah, that is gold right there. I mean, I think for our listeners to hear that, even as you said, Lisa, even though, many of our clients have experienced, or despite the fact that they've experienced some of these horrific events or incidents, the power behind us believing that they still have that inner wisdom, and how we honor that in session, either through the silence and holding that. And you said, obviously creating that safe environment is crucial. I mean, that is awesome. No, it really is. I mean, I just know, I can picture myself, driving, commuting to my trainings, whatever it was, and for many hours, and just wishing I'd had a master therapist sitting next to me as I was thinking about my clients, because this is this type of stuff that you need to hear. And it comes up again and again. And this statement that you said, when you realized at one point that you just needed to shut up. I mean, so many really of the guests I have come at one point to that realization, and it seems so simple, but it can oftentimes be kind of a conundrum and difficult. But let's kind of move on, because I really want to get to this one, and I think you're going to light this question up because you've kind of touched on it a little bit. So, we talked a little bit about your journey, what got you into this field, and now I want to focus on kind of an early clinical error or mistake. Some people don't even like that to use that word, but tell us a story, Lisa, about an early experience you had where things just weren't going right. You kind of, flubbed it up, and really what you learned from that.
Wait, I only get to tell you one story?
Only one.
Oh boy. Let me go through the Rolodex and figure out where we're going to go, Guy. I think one of the major mistakes that I made early on in my career, and it's interesting because it flowed from the stuff I alluded to earlier, which was, having such a good, solid sense of self, and having these phenomenal role models in terms of having nurturing parents. So I told you I wanted to pay it forward, and I wanted to kind of help people achieve that same feeling of inner peace and self-worth. And so I think where that really went haywire as a beginning therapist was this desire to kind of be the parent that you never had. And so part of my agenda, and again, this is all the countertransferential stuff, part of my agenda was I was going to give you this extraordinarily reparative experience. I was going to be the mother you never had. And what that inadvertently did, I mean, I want to say it came from a place of good intentions. And, it's funny, I give a lot of talks about countertransference. And I always like to preface that by saying, when we screw up, 99.9% of the time, it comes from a place of good intention, right? It comes from a lot of empathy and compassion that we hold for our clients. That's why we go into this field. But the way that I screwed it up was that I really inadvertently began to create a lot of codependency with my clients. I was inadvertently giving them this message that they really needed me, that they really couldn't get by without me, because I was saying things like, look, if you get the urge to hurt yourself in any way, make sure you call me first, but before you do anything else, call me. And I'm very grateful to my husband, who's brilliant and wise and my best friend, who said to me one night at 4 a.m. when I had just finished an hour and a half phone session with a client from 2:30 to 4 a.m., he turned to me in bed and said, "Do you realize that you do your best work with clients in the middle of the night?" That was like a really big aha moment. And then he said, "And by the way, do you charge them, for that hour and a half?" And of course the answer was no. So I realized that there was this terrible codependency that I was responsible for fostering and creating, because I was giving them this message that I was going to be the best thing that ever happened to them. I was going to be the sort of the source through which they were going to do their reparative work and heal. And the problem is once you set that up, once you put yourself out there as a 24/7 therapist, and Guy, I think this is important because I see this playing out now. I do a lot of consulting work for therapists in the field, and I hear story after story about therapists who allow their clients to text them any time of the day of night or night. They email them all night long. See, I think in the 21st century, that's kind of what that's morphed into. So when we put ourselves out there as therapists who are available 24/7, think about the resentment that that's going to create, not only for the therapist, because it will, whether they admit it or not, it will, but think about what happens for the client when they are in crisis and they call you at 2:00 in the morning and you don't pick up the phone and you don't answer. You're setting up this incredibly unrealistic and unfair expectation about your availability. And again, you're giving them the message that they can't get by without you. So the shift for me occurred really when I began to learn about parts work and inner child work. And I had this aha moment where I thought, wait a second, it's not about me being the mother you never had. It's about me helping you access inside of yourself the mother that you never had, and teaching you how to be your own best parent to those wounded inner parts and those younger parts inside of you. And what that led to was a very profound shift in boundary setting that I did with my clients, that I was no longer available 24/7. It led to a whole new set of messages that I began to give my clients about my belief that they had what it takes to be able to heal and tap into that inner wisdom.
Yeah. No, keep going. Were you going to? Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt.
No. That was. I was going to say now I'd give you 50 other examples of mistakes, but that's a big one.
Yeah,
that's a big one.
Yeah, and I just love the way you articulated that whole thing. I mean, the way you started out with saying, first of all, I love what you said about, many of the mistakes we make often come from a place of, genuine concern and wanting to help. Obviously, that's why, we go into this field. And, then you talked about, I'm going to be the parent you never had. And of course, that's coming from a great place. You've had this experience, you had this incredible childhood, and you have this great support, but having this agenda about, giving the client the reparative experience. And obviously when we're holding that perspective, we are coming into session with a different perspective, a different set of tools, a different set of techniques and interventions we're using. And then this shift happened around this boundary setting and looking at things from a different way and giving your clients a different message. That is so profound. And I think that's a great lesson for, many of our listeners to hear, and especially new therapists, because you go into this field and you want to learn as much as you can. And oftentimes you want to start implementing all these interventions and tools and techniques, and invariably, it kind of feels, you walk into session feeling as if you do know more than the client. But what the message I'm getting from you, Lisa, is that, again, you needed to shut up and value and honor the wisdom that the clients were going to teach you.
Exactly.
That is so powerful. That is, yeah.
I think you've given me the title for my next book, which is Just Shut Up.
Just shut up. Well, it goes great with that other one. Wait, why am I talking?
Yeah, why am I
love
talking?
That.
Isn't that good?
So that kind of moves us right into this next question. And it's kind of my favorite question, which is, why are we in this field? I love that question because asking ourselves why really kind of ignites us. It asks us to really question what's motivating us, what's driving us. People get into this field for, a variety of different reasons. Tell us why you're doing this day to day.
It's a great question. And I think there's definitely more than one reason. And I think as I get older and do this work longer and longer, in some ways, maybe the reasons are shifting. I know that now when I drive to my office every day, I always have a grin on my face. And some people find that hard to believe, especially when you're working with trauma. But it's just so damn inspiring, These are such remarkable human beings. And I consider it such an extraordinary privilege, really, to be able to be a witness to their healing journeys. And it's just such a blessing in my life to be able to sit with somebody who has struggled in so many profound ways and yet, continues to land on their feet and continues to be able to have a sense of humor and to be able to still find the joy in things. Watching people blossom and bloom and heal is like one of the coolest things you ever get to do. So I feel like what I do is such a gift and it's such a privilege. And so part of why I do it, honestly, is just to keep getting that experience and that exposure to the courage and the bravery and the resiliency of other people. I also do this work because, as we said in the beginning, it's become a beautiful opportunity for me to really hold on to the most creative parts of who I am. And I think this is a very exciting time to be a trauma specialist because, in the old days, we really just did talk therapy. And to be quite honest, we did it wrong. We were always working, sort of top down, and we were inadvertently creating a lot of abreactive experiences for our clients. Most of us used to joke that we had a revolving door from our private practice rooms to the local hospitals because we didn't know what we were doing. And we just kept, kind of putting people right back into a fight, flight, freeze state. It's very thrilling to me to be a teacher and a clinician in this day and age in the world of trauma, because thanks to people like Bessel van der Kolk and Dan Siegel and Daniel Amen and Janina Fisher and others, what we've come to understand is that so much of this work happens, bottom up, working with the body, working visually, working creatively, incorporating art, using sand tray, using movement. So it's thrilling for me, really, to be able to feel like I'm doing something that is truly meaningful. I'm so proud, of what I do, and I'm so proud of all of us in this field, because I think that we really, really do very important, meaningful work. So to be able to put together, doing something that's genuinely meaningful and enables me to feel like even in a small way I can make a difference on this planet. And then to be able to bring to that all of the creative stuff that just gets my juices flowing and is just so fun and is so now effective in terms of how we can help people heal from their trauma. So to be able to put those things together is why I love this work and why I keep doing this work, because it's fun, it's creative, and you are, touching lives and making a difference. Like, wow, what a combination of things, There's not a lot of careers where you could say that. I certainly couldn't say it if I was just doing musical theater, And I couldn't say it if I was just doing talk therapy all day long. But I can say it because I've been able to sort of marry both of those passions in creative and effective ways.
You have so much power and passion in your voice, Lisa. First of all, you don't sound like you have a cold.
Neither do you.
Second of all, you don't sound like you've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, it's just so inspiring to me to really hear you talk about this. And I love what you're saying about, being able to draw from really who you are as a person, the different facets of your interests and passions, and bringing that in to this work you do, which makes it even more meaningful for you. Give us an example of how you're doing that. I mean, you talked a little bit about, treatment used from top down, et cetera, but yeah. How are you creative with your clients and the work you do?
Sure. So it's kind of cool because, in the old days when you'd ask a question, right? And the client would say, I don't know. Or they would just be silent or shrug their shoulders. And again, when I first started out, those were like really scary, deadly moments, right? The client says, I don't know. And I'm sitting there going, well, now what do I do? Well, now what the hell do I do? Now, today, when a client says, I don't know, for me, that's an exciting, great moment because that's a beautiful opportunity to introduce a nonverbal modality. So when a client will say something like, I know how I feel about this, but I don't have words for it, right? That's a very common phenomenon that we get with trauma survivors. Like, I know what I'm feeling inside, but I can't articulate it. There are not words for it. So for me, that's a great sort of entree into, could we think about line, shape, and color, and could you draw what the feeling might look like if it was visual? Is there a body movement or gesture that could in some way illustrate the feeling? Like, forget about words. We don't have to use words. Just stand up and move. What movement potentially could be a way to communicate what you're feeling? Or I use sand tray work, and I love it. I'm a huge fan of it. So I can say, let's just look at all the figurines. See if there's like a couple of figures or one figure that in some way could speak to the emotion that you're sitting with right now. So, those are examples of when you feel that roadblock because there's not a verbal way for the client to articulate what they're needing to express. That's when you go to movement. That's when you go to drawing. That's when I go to two-handed writing. That's when I go to sand tray. That's when I go to role play, or let's put the feeling in an empty chair. And these are not all new strategies. I mean, some of this stuff has been around for a long time, but kind of exciting that we can pull stuff that, Fritz Perls was doing in Gestalt therapy 30, 40 years ago, and stuff that Milton Erickson was doing, with his hypnotic work, and newer stuff that Pat Ogden is doing with sensory motor therapy. And we can pull all of those nonverbal sort of body-based strategies, art therapy-based strategies, and bring them into the therapy room. Now, in order for your listeners to do this, they have to have the tools within the room, right? So you have to have the sand tray there. You have to have the figures. You have to have the crayons and the markers and the pens and the paper, like visible, where clients can see it. One of the things that I learned from Pat Ogden is this concept of curiosity. Really, really important to kind of evoke and access and then harness a client's inherent curiosity. And I think one of the great ways that we can help clients to be curious about their own narratives and their own emotions and their own decision making is to have creative things in the office in plain sight. So when a client walks into the room, like when a new client walks in and they see the sand tray and they see shelves of figurines, they're going to walk over to it and they're going to say, like, what's this? And that's evoking curiosity, right? They see the paper, they see the clay. Like it's so it's not, I really want to put that out there. It's not just about like knowing that in your bottom drawer you have markers and paper. Right. It's like make it somehow visible to your client. Yeah. Because that's going to evoke the creative, that's going to access the creative part of them. And what we know in the world of trauma is that trauma is not stored in the languaging part of the brain. That's a really important thing for people to hear if they don't already know it, that it's not stored in Broca's area. Trauma is stored visually, and that's why so many of our clients go into flashback. And trauma is stored viscerally on the body. And that's why things like sensory motor psychotherapy and somatic experiencing and movement can be so effective in helping clients to reconnect with their narratives. So I always say, when I teach at my institute, I always say, both to seasoned and very beginning therapists, if you're going to be a trauma therapist in 2015, you cannot just do talk therapy anymore. You have to be willing to learn creative modalities because those are the true ways into healing for our clients.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing. As you're talking, Lisa, I'm just thinking to myself. I mean, first of all, I love what you said about, it's not, you've got to have the crayons and whatever. Yeah. You've got to have that out so people can see it to evoke curiosity. I love that. It's not enough just to have everything, in the bottom drawer where you can access it when you want. That's a whole different ball game, and it's a whole different perspective. And it really is a shift in how you are creating an environment, how you're creating that session and place for your clients. Man, this is awesome. I know our listeners here are just going, oh my God, I gotta pull over and write this down. Seriously. So, you've already given, our listeners so many bits of wisdom and gold nuggets here, but many of our listeners, again, are just getting into this field. Many of our listeners are maybe more experienced, but don't think that they've worked with, individuals who've been traumatized, but break it down for us. Give us some advice for individuals who are just getting into this field.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to give you advice, and it's whether you're new or you've been doing it for 40 years, because I think the day that you say I'm too old to get advice is the day that you need to quit what you're doing. So I think this is for all of us, particularly as it pertains to working with trauma survivors. I want to reiterate something that I already alluded to, and that is it's so important to set boundaries and to have limits, and to not be available 24/7, and make it very clear to your clients that you're not. Make it clear that it has nothing to do with not caring about them, but rather you're actually attempting to help them gain mastery over being able to access their own internal resources for comfort and for soothing. Having said that, equally important that you make sure that your clients are connected to other resources for support. So I'm a very big believer in making sure that my clients are hooked up with a 12-step meeting of some kind, or at the very least have hotlines that they can call if they do go into crisis at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm very big on at least exploring with them spirituality and spiritual connections, because I think they can derive tremendous comfort and soothing from that. So set limits and make sure that they're connected to other resources. You never want it to just be you. When a client says, you are my lifeline, you are the reason that I'm still here, know that that's a huge problem. Right? Because you do not want to be the only person in their lives whom they consider to be a resource for support. I have another really big saying or sort of mantra that I've really tried to hold true to as I become more seasoned, and that is, don't work harder than your client does. So if I have a client who's going to work 110%, I am right there next to them. But if you've got clients working 10% and you're working 110%, that's problematic. And it's really not going to play out, well. I also like to say that you're only as effective professionally as the extent to which you take care of yourself personally. And part of what that leads into is, I think, a very sort of necessary need to have balance in your life. It's really funny when I train trauma specialists and I say to them, what do you guys do for fun or for a hobby? Here's what I hear. They watch SVU on television. They read books about serial killers. They go to every conference they can go to about trauma. They have 13 books on their nightstand that they've bought at conferences that are about trauma. So it's so important to have a whole other part of your life that has nothing to do with trauma and has nothing to do with your work. So it's really about finding that counterbalance to trauma, going towards hobbies and relationships that are joyful, and really are not about, women getting raped. The number one show that therapists watch, or the number one channel they watch, is the Lifetime channel. And I don't know if you know the Lifetime channel, but the Lifetime channel is just movie after movie after movie about women being stalked and raped. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, it speaks to trauma survivors. It calls our name because that's what we do for a living. But even more important that that we're doing stuff that has nothing to do with trauma. And to this day, I perform in community theater. I act, I direct, I choreograph high school musicals. I make sure that I'm doing stuff that is totally joyful and has nothing to do, with trauma. My other basic rule of thumb or advice that I give people is someone has to stay grounded and present at all times in the therapy session, and it better be you, because it's often not the client. So really, really important. And I'm going to say this, guys, specifically to trauma specialists who are themselves trauma survivors. This is where it gets really important to kind of make sure that you've done your own healing work and that you're not dissociating and that you're not getting triggered. You've really got to be that present resource for your clients because they're zoning out all the time, as you know, in a therapy session. So we've really got to be able to hold the present moment. And lastly, around the issue of self-disclosure, because I think that there is a clinical place for self-disclosure, but I always say don't let the spotlight stay on you for more than 5 seconds. Make sure it goes right back to the client. Otherwise, the therapy session is about you, and that's problematic.
So, all right, boundaries, make sure the clients are connected to other modes of support. You talked about spirituality and, making sure that we're not working harder than our clients. self-nourishment, self-care. And I love this. Someone has to stay grounded and present at all times, and it better be you.
Yep.
And making sure that the spotlight isn't on us for more than 5 seconds. These are all going to be up on the show notes page at westcoasttraumaproject.com. We're going to have all your information on your website, which is amazing. We haven't gotten to your books, which we'll get to next. Share with us 2 books which have inspired you, and they can be either trauma related or not, Lisa.
Oh, okay, interesting. Oh gosh, only 2. Well, I mean, I have to say Norman Doidge's book, The Brain That Changes Itself, was just monumental for me because the whole concept of neuroplasticity is so hopeful and so exciting for those of us in the trauma world to know that the brain is malleable and capable of growth and change until the day we die, rather than what I learned in grad school, which was that basically our brains peak at 18 and then it's downhill from there, right? Our brain cells just keep dying off. So his book, The Brain That Changes Itself, that book just was thrilling for me to read, and it's really accessible and well written. So I love that book, and it's very inspiring, gives you lots of hope. And I also think the other thing in the trauma field that is so important that Louis Cozzolino wrote about in a very accessible and beautifully written book called The Neurobiology of Human Relationships. And certainly Dan Siegel, I just have to sort of put his name out there because he's written so many similar kinds of books. But this notion that the impact that relationship has on brain development, I think is just breakthrough stuff. So the neurobiology of the human relationship, I love that book. Any book about attachment, I actually think is really important for people in the trauma world to have some familiarity with, because even though that's not a new concept, the whole notion of secure versus disorganized attachment is really getting a resurgence now in the field of trauma, and really important to understand the impact that attachment has, throughout a person's life, in terms of affect regulation versus affect dysregulation. I love anything by Richard Schwartz because I think his internal family systems model, parts work, it's such an integral part of how I work, both with people with multiplicity and people who don't have multiplicity. I just think his model is internal family systems is brilliant. So I love anything that Dick has written. And I'm very proud of my books, Guy. I don't mean to sound self-promoting, but I'll tell you why I'm proud of my books. I'm proud of them because I think there are so few books out there that talk about self-destructive behavior from a depathologized and strengths-based approach. So much of the research out there, so many of the books out there that talk about things like cutting and eating disorders and addiction, always make it synonymous with borderline personality disorder. And I don't see it that way at all. I look at these behaviors as coping strategies. I look at them as creative and brilliant and necessary. And then, of course, the role of the goal of the therapeutic process is to give clients new resources and tools so that they no longer need those dysfunctional coping strategies and can let them go. And I'm really proud of the books that I've written because it's a very unique and very different spin on working with what I think can be very frightening and triggering behaviors for therapists. So I'm proud of those books. You can let me know whether you want me to say the titles or not.
Well, I'll say the titles. I do want you to speak a little bit more about them. So we're talking about Treating Self-Destructive Behaviors in Traumatized Clients, a Clinician's Guide. And also in its second edition, Letting Go of Self-Destructive Behaviors, a Workbook of Hope and Healing. And I really like what you said about, coming at this topic from a different perspective. Say more about that.
Yeah, in this field for so many years that we've had this sort of rigid approach to working with these behaviors, including things like forcing clients to sign standard safety contracts, which totally don't work and completely blow up in your face. And I think create a power struggle and actually exacerbate the cutting or the addictive behavior. So I think we got that all wrong. I think pathologizing it by saying this is synonymous with borderline personality is a mistake. For me, borderline personality means trauma survivor. And just to give you a very quick example of what the impact I think that has, if I were to call you on the phone and say, I know you're really busy, but could you please take on this other client? I know you can help her. She's borderline. Okay. What's your reaction to that? In your most honest moments, your reaction is, I'm really sorry, my caseload is full. Right. But if instead I called you and said, I know you're busy, but could you please take this woman? I know you can help her. She's a trauma survivor. I'm going to suggest that what that's going to immediately evoke is our feelings of empathy and compassion in you. And so I think we've made this major, major mistake in the mental health field by labeling trauma survivors as people with borderline personality, because we're literally putting a glass ceiling on the extent to which we believe they can heal. And that absolutely is going to affect the outcome of treatment. So I think that's a major, major problem. And the third thing is that we sort of put this demand on people who do things like cut or burn their bodies or have eating disorders, because of our own anxiety as clinicians, we really push them to give up these behaviors. But the part that we leave out is, now what are they going to do? So until we're giving them new ways of self-soothing and communicating their pain narratives and short-circuiting untenable thoughts and feelings, until they have a repertoire of healthy coping strategies, how can we possibly expect that they're going to give up these behaviors and not relapse or not turn to another kind of self-destructive behavior? So I think that for years we've been putting the cart before the horse by having this expectation that people simply stop cutting before we've given them resources to accomplish what cutting does for them. Because people get something from their behaviors. They wouldn't be doing them if they didn't get something from them.
Yeah. So again, treating self-destructive behaviors in traumatized clients, a clinician's guide, and letting go of self-destructive behaviors, a workbook of hope and healing, both of which the links will be up on the podcast page at westcoasttraumaproject.com. Lisa, how do people get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Sure. So actually one of the easier ways is through my website, which is just lisaferentz.com. And that can give you access to my email. And it will also give you access to a lot of resources that I'm constantly putting on the website. I also have a professional Facebook page. If they go to Lisa Ferentz Trauma Specialist, every day we put up articles and inspirational sayings and research and things for both clinicians and lay people to really just sort of keep our understanding of trauma state of the art. So the Facebook page, I'm in LinkedIn. I'm 56 years old, but I'm still trying to, be with it in terms of social media.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. You nailed it, man. You are just phenomenal. You're just so inspiring to talk to. And I'll tell you why. Because, you're coming at this obviously from so much experience. But for me, you really shed the light on the importance of being creative, the importance of, honoring who we are and those other aspects of ourselves and being able to bring that into the work we do. And also being able to come at this from the perspective of, yes, obviously it's important for us to learn and have the techniques, but you've also got to shut up and listen. And there's so much power in that. And that I just keep coming back to that because it for me, that indicates a kind of acceptance of the wisdom of the client.
Yes.
And I just think you sent that message to our listeners, and it's so powerful and so profound. Again, everything's going to be up on the show notes page. Lisa, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. What a pleasure. What a pleasure to talk with you, Guy. I love what you're doing. This is an awesome thing that you're doing. So keep doing it.
Thank you so much. All right. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.